Dear learners, this lecture on communalism, views and types is the follow-up lecture to the first two lectures in which communalism was generally introduced and the views of Indian thinkers on communalism were expounded. In this lecture, the types of communalism are introduced and briefly explained. T.K. Uman, the professor of sociology, identified 6 types of communalism, and Bipin Chandra, the professor of modern history, identified 3 forms of communalism from India's modern history. We end the lecture with clarifying some doubts surrounding the link between religion and communalism. Let us start with the types of communalism. There are 6 types of communalism. Professor T.K. Uman, who was the professor of sociology in the Jawaharlal Nehru University, makes a distinction between 6 types of communalism. They are assimilationist variety of communalism, welfareist communalism, retreatist communalism, retaliatory communalism, separatist communalism and secessionist variety of communalism. We will now briefly explain each of these types. The first one is assimilationist variety of communalism. Herein, a particular style of life is identified with Indian or a national style of life, and anyone who wants to be authentic Indian or a citizen ought to be following that lifestyle. An example, a particular religious style of living is advised as a country's style of living, and everyone is advised to follow the lifestyle and then following the single uniform lifestyle. Everyone is brought under the umbrella of a single lifestyle or religion or a nation. The second one is welfareist communalism. It can be simply defined as communal actions which are intended to bring about welfare for a particular community. According to this stance, one defines a particular religious community as one's constituency. The context of this definition may be education, health or freedom of worship. Welfareist communalism is first of all a product of a democratic politics and the politics pursued by a welfare state. As an example, we can cite the coming together of a minority group to safeguard their rights and to stand together in asking for their welfare from the state. Thus, they make themselves heard by the state. It is coming together to guarantee the welfare of a particular community. The third one is retreatist communalism. They are religious groups which officially prescribe, prohibit their members from participating in political activities. The people of Baha'i faith practice that in certain parts of the country where their number is too small. The Christians do not that. These groups withdraw from the political processes continuously because they are numerically insignificant. They seem to think that there is no point in participating in the political process. This attitude is an indication of sheer helplessness on their part. But this withdrawal or presumed non-action is an action. In a democratic system where everyone is advised to play the vibrant participatory role, even the withdrawal will be seen as a variety of communalism. The fourth one is retaliatory communalism. We will begin explaining this concept with some well-known occurrences. Very frequently, we come across reports in the media about a particular group rejoicing because another group is injured or hurt. There are many examples. Some of the well-known ones are the Indian Muslims celebrating the victory of the Pakistan cricket team, a section of people who celebrated the assassination of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Their celebration in fact hurt the feelings of others, the majority groups, when the celebration which are positive and neutral in nature are intended to hurt the feelings of others. They can turn into violence. The neutral act of celebration becomes in this context a communal action. This necessarily involved in retaliation, such a reality is classified retaliatory communalism. The fifth one is separatist communalism. This is the kind of communalism which insists on the culture specificity of a particular religious group and which demands autonomy. The separatists do not want to disengage themselves from the polity as such. They are interested in continuing and want to operate within the ambit of the nation's constitution. Most of the times, some of these groups assert their identity by basing it on language, but very often you will find that there is a very curious mixing of language and religion. Some interesting examples are Dravidian Hinduism, which means the Tamil language, Christian Naga tribal identity, Mizo language, Aryan Hinduism, Hindi language, etc. Interestingly, these collectivities would insist that they are only searching for an identity, and that too within the nations or Indian polity, not outside of it. They would also further emphasize that the content of their identity is essentially cultural or national. They would inevitably opt for the terms such as cultural nationalism or cultural pluralism. We identify them as separatist communalism. The sixth one is successionist variety of communalism. This is a degree higher to the separatist communalism, or we can say that separatist communalism is less intense successionist variety, but conceptually they are basically different. Successionist type insists that a religious group is a political entity and therefore it should have a separate political roof and independent sovereign polity. Some of the examples are the demand for a separate nation state by a small minority in Punjab in the name of Khalistan, or a demand for a separate nation state by a small minority in the northeastern states, especially by Nagas and Mizos. T.K. Uman has himself acknowledged that these are 6 types of communalism which are qualitatively different. This is a result of an analytical thinking, but the attributes of these 6 types and its implications for the nation are not yet studied. They need to be studied and researched, and only then a proper guidance for the betterment of the nation will be possible. Also, only such research will help as content and the advances of any type of communalism that is harmful to the Indian society. 3 forms of communalism. Professor Bipin Chandra, Professor of Modern History in Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, on the other hand, speaks of 3 forms of communalism that were present in the modern Indian history. They are communal nationalism, liberal communalism, extreme communalism. The first one, communal nationalism, strictly speaking, this cannot be considered communalism at all, claim Bipin Chandra. This operated within the framework of nationalism. It was actually an aspect of unclearly or imprecisely defined nationalism. In this form, nationalism remained primary. Bipin Chandra writes, the communal nationalist, the one who subscribed to communal nationalism, accepted the basic notions of community and special communal interests, but believed in the possibility as well as desirability of their integrations into the broader nation and national interests. He or she believed and propagated that even when the interests of the different religious communities were different, they did not clash, and that it was only within the developing nationalism that the different communal interests could be protected. He or she also believed that his or her belonging to a particular religious community should not be, at least ideally, a relevant factor in politics. His was the stand of the leaders of the freedom movement. They acknowledged that there were religious differences in India. They knew very well that each religious community was unique and different from other, and each religious community had its own aspirations, but that was never seen as an obstacle for the united fight against the national enemy, the Imperial British. Let us take for instance the quote by V.D. Savarkar, one of the early nationalists. He writes in the introduction to one of his important books titled Indian War of Independence 1857, written in 1908, the nation ought to be the master and not the slave of its own history. The feeling of hatred against the Mohammedans was just and necessary in the times of Shivaji, but such a feeling would be unjust and foolish if nursed now, simply because it was the dominant feeling of the Hindus then. The idea here is a nation first and all the others next. Of course, nation would include all the different religious communities. The second one is liberal communalism. Liberal communalist is basically a believer in and a practitioner of communal politics, but she or he still upheld certain liberal, democratic, humanist and nationalistic values. A liberal communalist argued that India consisted of distinct religion-based communities which had their own separate and special interests which they did not share with each other and which often came into mutual conflict. But the same person also believed that these interests could gradually be accommodated and brought into harmony within the overall developing national interests, some of which were common even at the outset. Liberal communalists accepted that the ultimate destiny of Indian politics was the merger of the different communities into a single nation. Whatever might be the degree of present communal competition and conflict, thus the liberal communists demanded separate communal rights, safeguards, weightage and reservations in jobs and legislatures, separate electorates, etc., within the broad concept of one Indian nation in the making. Liberal communalists accepted national unity as the ultimate goal, as also the concept of the ultimate common interests of Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs and Christians. This is more a mix of assimilationist variety of communalism and welfarist communalism explained by Professor T.K. Uman. Bipin Chandra also notes that the liberal communalism, even when advocating communalism, never threatened the unity of the Indian nation. From the modern Indian history, Bipin Chandra cites the example of the revised objectives of the constitution of the Muslim League that was approved in the 1913 Lucknow session. The objectives of the League as laid down in the constitution were the protection and advancement of the political and other rights and interests of the Indian Muslims, the promotion of national unity, promotion of friendship and union between the Muslims and other communities of India, attainment with the cooperation of other communities of a system of self-government suitable to India. The third one is extreme communalism. Extreme communalism is also known as fascist communalism. Extreme communalism was irrational and based on fear and hatred. Extreme communalism had a tendency to use violence or terror as a weapon against political opponents. When the protest required the form of popular politics and mass mobilizations, this form of communalism crept in history of India's freedom movement, observes Bipin Chandra. The extremist political past positions appealed basically to irrational impulses and fears. They were seldom logically or historically argued. They assumed that to be true which was precisely needed to be so proved. They were proclaimed to be true because they were loudly and repeatedly asserted. The words of the extreme communist leaders were empty, but they evoked emotions. Their words had no meaning, only purpose. The purpose was to excite people and to mobilize them quickly. The extremist communist leaders evolved politics without evolving political thought. They emphasized the political tactics over a proper political program. They kept their program undefined or defined it in a makeshift manner to meet immediate political needs or to cater to the immediate audience. In fact, they lacked any specific social, economic or political program. This form of communalism could cause great damage to the unity of the nation. Bipin Chandra says that it was this form of communalism that led the Muslim League leaders to demand for a separate nation for the Muslims. Bipin Chandra also identified that the three forms of communalism were not mutually exclusive. Even when the form of liberal communalism in 1930s was present in the communal nationalism 1900 to 1930 had not fully been obliterated. Liberal communalism existed even with the arrival of the extreme communalism. These movements are also associated with strong personalities who even moved from one phase to another. For instance, Lajapati Rai and Muhammad Ali Jinnah moved from communal nationalism to liberal communalism. Jinnah's political career spanned all three phases. In fact, the next subsegment is communalism and religion. We also need to make certain things clear. Often times communalism and religion are understood together and this results in many misunderstandings. We can safely say that religion or religious differences do not lie at the roots of communalism. They are not responsible for communalism. Communalism or making religious difference the basis of political organization, mobilization and action is not inherent or inevitable in a religiously plural society marked by existence of many religious and therefore religious differences. Nor are the communalists guided by the motive of protecting or promoting or reforming or developing their religion. They are not inspired by religion, nor is religion and the end or object of communal politics. In other words, religion is not the underlying cause of communalism. It is only communalism's vehicle. It is necessary in this respect to distinguish between religion as a belief system and the ideology of religious identity for economic and political purpose, which is communalism. The two are very different. However, while religion does not lead to communalism, religious narrow-mindedness, bigotry and obscurantism do create a certain receptivity to communal ideology and politics. Such elements prevail in a different manner and to a different extent in different religious and localities and in different religious practices. These elements should be brought out, analyzed, criticized and eliminated. The process has to be different for different religious and different regions, localities and social groups. In practice, however, the opposite is happening in recent years and efforts are being made to strengthen precisely such elements in different religions. For example, such universally respected religious cultural figures as Ram and Krishna are respected equally by Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs and Christians are being communalized. Such is also the case with such religious, cultural, social functions as Dashara, Diwali, Holi, Muharram, Eid, Christmas and birthdays of Guru Nanak, etc. While religion is not the cause of communalism and the communalists have little to do with religion or interest in it, what is true is that the communalists use religious differences as the basis of their politics. They exploit religion for political ends. They have no other reference to religion or religious issues. In the era of mass politics, they try to attract the masses by exciting their deep religious feelings by arousing the fear that their religious is in danger. To raise communalism from mere middle class phenomenon to a popular movement, religion is used as an inflammable factor. It is therefore necessary that every effort should be made to separate religion from communalism. Communal parties must not be allowed to usurp religious sentiments or the cultural heritage of India. It should be made clear to the people that communalism is not in keeping with the tenets of Hinduism, Islam, Sikhism or Christianity. Their practice of violence and preaching of hatred against the followers of other religions have no sanction in their own religion. In fact, the communalists are enemies of their own religion. They do grave injustice to it. They manipulate differences of religion for political gains. Dear learners, I hope you all must have enjoyed this session with enormous information. It may have enriched the knowledge on overview about communalism. Dear learners, we will meet with another schedule. Thank you. All the best.